Hello, welcome to Bookcase with me, Manoj Tripathi from ASEAN TV. Today we are really lucky to have Kun Dominic Folder joining our program today to discuss a very interesting book called King Bhumibol Adulyadej, A Blind's Work, which is one of the bestsellers in local bookshops right now, right? Kun Dominic, how's the book is doing right now in local bookshops?
Well, the book was launched officially on the 30th of November, which is about just over 2 months ago.
Right.
And it had actually sold out technically on the first day.
Okay.
Because the initial print run in hardback was about 10,000 copies.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons for that was that the bookshops had slightly under-ordered. They'd underestimated the interest.
Right.
And there'd been some quite large advance sales
Right.
as well. So the book has gone to reprint 3 times.
Yep.
It's had 3 printings so far. And we've now got to the point where we have 25,000 hardback copies in print.
Uh-huh.
And we are moving to a 4th printing in English.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, there have been discussions with various groups about doing a Thai translation.
Okay, that's in the pipeline.
That's in the pipeline, and I can't really talk about where that's going. But the plan is to do a translation into Thai over the course of this year.
Yeah.
And also quite likely into some other languages, for example, Japanese,
Right.
French, Spanish maybe.
Right.
Countries that would have an interest in that. And of course, in a changing world, we may be looking at Chinese editions.
Okay.
We might be looking at Russian editions. So as interest in Thailand develops, there are more translations opening up. But that is quite a bit further down the pipeline.
Yeah, Kun Dominic, you are the senior editor of the publication project. It's really interesting to see this book, being snapped up by the Thai people. I'm sure that there are some foreigners who like to read this book. But it has never been the case that an English language book published and sold locally will be such a bestseller like this. Do you think it's because of the subject or is because of what?
I don't actually know where it features on the league tables in all Thai history selling English books here.
Right.
It's sold very strongly. As far as we know, it's been the #1 bestseller at Kinokuniya and Asia Books for the last 6 weeks, since basically the restocking occurred. I think there's a great deal of interest in the subject. That's quite clear. And people are interested in a book that has been produced in Thailand and is available, and I think they come to it with an open mind to see what it has to offer them. As you can see, it's a very large book. It's nearly 400 pages.
Right.
It's something of the order of 155,000 words. So it's a fairly formidable text. The book is interesting because it's a mixture. One critic described it as a jumble, which is an incorrect word because it's not a jumble. The book has been put together with a great deal of thought. And what we have is a forward section of the book, which is an introduction to kingship, monarchy in Siam going back 7 centuries to the Sukhothai era. And the idea of that is to try and give people an idea of where the monarchy in Thailand comes from, what the history is, why Thais have this very strong affinity for kingship, why it plays a special role in their life. So it's an attempt just to set it without being overly scholastic or tedious. It's meant to be readable. The second section is the biography. And that is the largest single section of the book. It's nearly 50,000 words. It's divided into the cycles of King Bhumibol's life, so that we go through that logically. It's a chronological account. It's meant to be readable. It's very important that people find it engaging, and that as far as is possible that we make it a human story. We don't want to put it on some huge pedestal and turn it into some hagiographical or eulogistic account of a life. The life is interesting in its own rights by any standards, And so, if you like, a fairly straight telling of the story does the job well. It doesn't need to be embellished. And we've also included what we call the prelude, which is the story of Prince Mahidol of Songkla, the king's father, and Mom Sangwan, his mother, and to give an example, give people an idea of really what a remarkable story that was at the time. And then we move on from there to the second section, which is the work. And that is divided into health, because health was the first thing that King Bhumibol became involved in. Education, natural resources, which is really land and water management. And that is a strong part of the book, because that's what he did. That was his career, if you like. That's where he was active. And so we try and give an account of that that's objective, that says what happened and shows where there were problems. For instance, the education section, we talk about the difficulties with the distance learning in recent years. And then the fourth part of that section is sufficiency economy, which is the king's philosophy, which is a section that is difficult for a lot of people to engage with. They don't really understand what this is. They muddle it up with self-sufficiency. They think it's an economic theory, a sort of Keynesian economics or something like that. It's none of these things. And we try and explain briefly and concisely in about 15 pages what it is, what it isn't, where it came from, and how it might fit into a modern world. And also the impact it's had on Thailand, the fact that it's being taught in the schools, the fact that major corporations have tried to adopt some of the ideas. And we try and explain briefly and concisely in about 15 pages what it is, what it isn't, where it came from, and how it might fit into a modern world. And also the impact it's had on Thailand, the fact that it's being taught in the schools, the fact that major corporations have tried to adopt some of the ideas.
That's right.
Then we move into the third section of the book, which is what we call the crown. And if you like, these are the institutions that support the monarchy in Thailand. And I just have to have a quick look to refresh my memory. But we kick off with the Crown Property Bureau, which is everybody knows what the Crown Property Bureau is, but they don't necessarily understand what it does, what its functions are, what its assets are, who it belongs to. And we go through that in quite a lot of detail. And I'm pretty confident in saying that this section of the book contains information that hasn't been released before. So the Crown Property Bureau has allowed information to be released that should be new and adds to the knowledge, to the public, wealth of public knowledge, basically, on that subject. Then if I go back, can I just have a quick look at the front of the book? We have 4 more sections in here that second section, is the law of lèse majesté, which is a very topical subject. And this section is not in any way a justification for the law or a pamphlet supporting it. The purpose of this section was to explain to people quite clearly where the law of lèse majesté comes from, its European origins essentially, particularly 19th century, 20th century, 19th century Germany, how it developed in Thailand, how it has been used and how it has been abused. And we try and explain the mechanisms, we try and look at the way the law is applied, how it's become very politicized in recent years. This isn't an argument in support or against it. The fact is that the law exists. It is on the books. And people need to understand where it comes from and what's going on. And then they can form their own points of view. And so we're quite neutral about that. What we do not go into in that section is cases that are pending. As we all know, there's been a big increase. And we don't go into that very simply because they're in flux. They're in court, they're changing, and it's not the job of the book to try and keep up with that stuff. If we put that material in now, it would date very quickly, and people read and say, oh, but that's changed. So we're not doing that. We're giving you the context. We're giving you the background. So we're quite clear on where we come from. The next section is on the Privy Council, which is King Bhumibol's advisory body. And this is not a very well understood institution. I mean, it has great status and prestige in the country, and everybody has heard of it, but not necessarily understand what its purpose is, what it does. And I think one of the striking things about that section when we did the book was that we discovered how little had been written on this topic, and that it was actually extremely difficult for us to generate a brief for the writers to work on for this thing because so little was known, and quite a few items that we came up with were just wildly wrong. So for us, for everybody, it was a very interesting exercise to have a look at what it is, what it does, what people's perceptions of it are, and what maybe their perception should be to correct it. Then we take a look at the law of succession, which again is something that's not well understood. It's clearly defined in the law. We have the palace laws of 1924 of King Vajirabhut, who laid down various rules relating to the succession, and we explain how those are, in a way, advisory. They're guidelines that people can follow, and then you have what is actually dictated in law, and what will happen at some stage in the future. We don't know when. As far as we can gather at this point, and we're quite clear about that. So there's no vagueness in that section, and it attempts to bring some clarity again to something that's not well understood. And then the final section of the book is ceremonies and regalia, which is quite different. And that's the closest really that we get to trying to deal with the mystique, the magic of the monarchy, the ceremony, the regalia, the traditions. And we try and go into that because it's an important part of the monarchy. It is something that people see, they have an affinity for, they relate to it emotionally, spiritually, in all sorts of different ways. So we try and get in there and explain some of these things, and put things in that people might have thought they knew about but didn't. For example, I think this book contains the only English translation of the national anthem. Which is very difficult to translate because it's extremely hard. So it's not an official translation. We don't pretend that, but we have something that gives a casual reader who wants to know a little bit more some idea of what's going on. You have to remember that a lot of these things are very inaccessible. If you go back to the biography, we don't get into huge details or arguments that people, a royalist perspective. We try and avoid that. What we're trying to do is map out what happened historically, who appeared at what time, what were the dynamics between different people at different times in the reign, and explain that in a neutral way. And we're very consciously went out of our way not to attack people. That's not the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is to try and explain what was going on, where everything was coming from, but not to settle scores or prove that somebody was right or somebody was wrong. So, for example, I mean, if you read the sections on the latest cycle, on former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, I think you'll find that it's a pretty fair account of what he did, and that he's given credit for his successes, and that he was for his powerful showing in successive elections, and his delivery of policies and what have you. But we go through that stuff, so we're trying to explain it so that people can read it and then form their own ideas. And I think everybody associated with the book was very clear that it wasn't meant to be in some sense evangelical. We didn't want to go out and change the way people think. If people are critical, they can be critical. That's fine. But we would hope that if they'd read the book, they'd be better informed. And I think that's where that was an important part of the editorial philosophy.
If I ask you to describe this book as a portrait of the royal institution, how do you describe it? A fair portrait, a profile portrait, or well-rounded portrait. And we also have some other books that's available in the bookshop, you know, about not just the king, about local institution, about Thailand politics. What's happened to Thailand right now? What sort of image of our monarch that's come through this book anyway? Your personal idea.